say. Actually, Deborah, do I have this correct? Do I have after all that it's a tie at the end of this? First round? No? What do you have?
I have 21.5 and 24.5 for
Yeah?
and I have 20 and 23.5 for option.
Oh, for Glenn and Peter?
Yes.
20.5. Now, how do you get a 0.5? You gave it 8.5, didn't you? Okay, we'll look at this, but put it this way. It's close. All right? Very, very close. We're not sure how close it is yet, but it is very, very close after the first, the long program. Let's call it the long program. We're going backwards. So it's still anybody's game, guys. Don't give up, all right? Now, I fear for my life after Michael's comment a bit, and I think the flashlight in the eyes is scaring them. So guys, I'm going to change it a bit. That is the 1 minute thing, all right? I noticed that some of you are freaking out a little bit when you get a flashlight in the eyes. All right, we are now going to turn to stage 2, same order. You have this time, though, only 4 minutes. I will give you the bell after maybe 3.5 minutes, so that you have 30 seconds left to go. And remember, you are rebutting in this stage. You're rebutting. You hopefully listened to the other side. I should have mentioned that at the beginning. You should do that, but not clear that you actually would. So, Lawson, you're up. And as I said, 4 minutes you have, and this is rebuttal.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I want to first pick up on Peter's comment about the open system that we're moving into, because I obviously think that is exactly where we're heading. And I really would urge this audience, because you are the ones who are the producers of Canadian content, and you really do need to think about the implications of an open system, both on access issues and on the types of tools government can use to support the continuing objective of promoting Canadian content. And I think the rent issue I raised before is a very, very key issue that you need to think about. Because I do believe, and that's what our paper says, is that the use of the quota system has largely been an indirect subsidy. And where did that subsidy come from? That subsidy comes from the economic rents that the other players in the system generate. And if they're not generating those rents because of the open nature of this system, then there is going to be intense pressure to do away with that indirect form of subsidy. And that's basically what our message is to you in this audience. Be prepared for this, because it is not going to survive in the open world that Peter talks about. We have time. We're saying 5 years. We may be wrong about that, but I think it's probably about right. I again would urge you not to be in denial by looking at historical viewing patterns. If anyone studies the adoption of new technology, it always is a hockey stick. It starts out slow and it goes asymptotic at some point. And you are really facing that potential. So don't get deluded into thinking the sky is not falling because there hasn't been this rapid change in viewing patterns. It's happening demographically. We know it's happening. The equipment providers tell you it's happening. So I'm telling you, as an industry, you really do need to think about the pressure that's going to be applied on some of the instruments. Our paper doesn't say do away with regulations. It analyzes them instrument by instrument and says what is going to work, what are the implications, and you better get your act together. And I think, if anything, you people have the most at risk of anybody in the system. Because now the other thing, of course, which we do say, is that access is a key issue. And it's going to persist as a key regulatory instrument, certainly until we get to what we call the wireless IP world. But I urge you, seriously, not to put your head in the sand, be in denial. You really need to understand where the economic pressure is going to come from. Now, my last comment is something that Glenn said about the policy debate. See, I am not convinced that the Commission either has the role or the ability to bring about fundamental policy change. I'm not sure that the government wants it to have that role. But at the same time, I'm not convinced that the government itself is doing anything to decide what the policy should be. And so what I see is a vacuum, and what I would urge the industry to do, and I would urge you to do, perhaps in cooperation with other parts of the sector, to really think through what is going to be required in this new world, and how are we going to continue to support the production of Canadian content in a viable way in a world where the pressures are only going to increase. And I really think that you as an industry have the most at stake, as I said.
Time. Thank you. Judges, please. Sandra, 8. Paul, 7.5. Tim? 7. Okay. Okay, yep. Who, you guys? It's Glenn. Yes, of course. Let me reset, Glenn. Remember, 4 minutes, 30 seconds before the bell. Off you go.
Let's go back to the basic question, which is the proposition obsolete or not that the broadcasting systems policy and regulations, are the broadcasting policy and regulations obsolete or not? And we stand on the side of saying, no, they are not. What we have heard you say is that certain instruments need to be upgraded. Certain of the technical aspects of how the job is done need to be reviewed. Agreed, absolutely agreed. But what you have not said is the fundamental policy is obsolete. That is where we, I think, have a distinct difference of views if you are still supporting that proposition, because we do not. We say the policy is not obsolete. We say the government of Canada created many, many years ago a piece of legislation that said the people of Canada want a broadcasting system that is Canadian, want a broadcasting system that has Canadian values. They tried to articulate in Section 3 a number of objectives, sometimes contradictory objectives, but nonetheless objectives that legislation would be accountable to. And that legislation is still on the books, and that is very much the proposal that is on the table. And we believe it is not obsolete because Canadians continue to value that. Even though they change their consuming habits, they change their ways of consuming all things with new technologies, and including entertainment products and including cultural products, the fact of the matter is they have not walked away from their truly committed belief that a Canada without a Canadian broadcasting system is a lesser Canada. That's certainly the proposition that I support. Having said that, Michael, you said, let's have a dialogue between industries. No, we've had enough dialogue between industries. What we need to have is a broader dialogue. You know what? That's just like Arianna Huffington said. The White House has got Goldman and Sachs as the range of views on the banking system in the US. Doesn't make for a very broad view on what the future's going to be about. We need to have industries there, but we have to bring more folks in. The Commission tried to do it in December. It was a difficult task. More of that's got to be done. We've got to bring other views in, and it can't just be the incumbents. It can't just be the industries, because technology is being taken up by consumers, and technology is being driven by consumer choice. The last point is the role of regulation. Robert Reich, the former Secretary of Labor in the Clinton second administration, wrote a book called Supercapitalism. Basically, it says, after the Second World War, post-war America had initially a system that cohabitated had two systems that cohabitated harmoniously, capitalism and democracy. And these two systems worked well together for a time. Democratic institutions prospered, capitalism prospered, until capitalism took on a greater role in that relationship and began to dominate the democratic institutions. And that happened because we pulled back on regulation, small bits here and there, and other large bits. But ultimately, his argument is we find ourselves in a state of supercapitalism where capitalism dominates the democratic institutions. Ask yourself, why do people think less of our democratic institutions and of the value of voting? Perhaps because they see less traction and less outcomes than was the case previously when they felt they were voting for something that actually mattered. I believe certainly that regulation has a role. It has to balance off those interests in a collective situation that put the interests of business, the interests of the collective, the interests of social policy into a mix and come out with something that is of a balance. And I believe that's why we need ongoing regulation and supervision of the Canadian broadcasting system, and that's why it's not obsolete. It's very much necessary.
Good. Thank you, Glenn.